the philosopher who solved the meaning of life, Leo Tolstoy. Picture this: you're world-famous, wealthy beyond measure, and celebrated across continents. On the surface, you've won the game of life. And yet, deep down, you feel a growing darkness, a gnawing emptiness that makes you question everything you once believed in. This was the haunting reality of Leo Tolstoy, one of the greatest minds to ever hold a pen. Despite writing masterpieces like War and Peace and Anna Karenina, works that cemented his place in literary history, Tolstoy's life took a dramatic turn. As he stood at the pinnacle of success, he was gripped by a question far more powerful than fame or fortune. What is the point of it all? But what if I told you he believed he did find the answer? In this video, we're going to dive deep into Tolstoy's inner struggle, the doubts that shook his very soul, the answers he spent his life chasing, and the truth he believed he finally uncovered, and how, just maybe, that truth could change the way you look at your own life. Born in 1828 into a privileged Russian family, Leo Tolstoy was gifted with access to elite education and immersed in the classics from a young age. But beneath the surface of brilliance was a restless spirit. As a young man, he dove headfirst into a life of indulgence, wealth, pleasure, and worldly distractions. But even then, a part of him knew something wasn't right. As the years went on, his fame skyrocketed. His novels were read around the world, his name synonymous with genius. He lived in comfort, admired by kings and commoners alike. Yet none of it seemed to touch the hollow space growing inside him. Despite everything he had achieved, he couldn't shake the sense that it was all slipping through his fingers, temporary, fragile, and destined to be forgotten. The idea that everything he built would one day vanish shook him to the core. What's the use of building, striving, and loving if it all ends in death? The more he thought about it, the heavier the weight became. The applause, the riches, the praise. None of it could quiet the voice in his head asking, "Why does any of this matter?" And so, Tolstoy did what many do when faced with this kind of despair. He searched for answers. He turned to science, to philosophy, to art, but none of them gave him peace. Logic told him life was a brief flicker in an indifferent universe, that, in the grand scheme of things, nothing we do truly lasts, and that terrifying possibility, that nothing matters, became impossible for him to ignore. This realization didn't just unsettle Tolstoy, it consumed him. He described it as falling into a black hole, one that devoured not just his happiness but the very sense of why life was worth living. He stopped seeing any purpose in his work. His writing lost its meaning. Even caring for his family, once a source of joy, felt hollow. In his private journals, he admitted something chilling. The only thing he was absolutely sure of was that he was going to die. And that thought alone made living feel unbearable. The idea of ending his life became a constant shadow. He was so afraid of acting on it in a moment of weakness that he removed any ropes, sharp tools, or weapons from his home. He was walking a razor's edge, alive, but barely holding on. And yet, something deep inside him refused to give up. Instead of surrendering to the darkness, he made a decision, not to escape life, but to confront it fully. If logic and science had failed him, maybe the answers he was looking for existed somewhere else. But where? Tolstoy began turning his gaze outward. He started paying attention not to scholars or elites, but to ordinary people, peasants, farmers, laborers, men and women who lived through hardship every day, often with barely enough to survive. And what he saw left him stunned. These people, living in harsh and uncertain conditions, still carried a calm strength. They had no grand theories or formal education, but they had something he lacked: peace. They accepted life, with all its suffering and uncertainty, without crumbling under it. While he was drowning in doubt, they walked through life with quiet confidence. It made him ask, what do they know that I don't? How are they able to live without constantly collapsing under the weight of unanswerable questions? He kept observing them, and the answer became clearer. They weren't relying on reason alone. They believed. They had faith, simple, unshakable faith in something larger than themselves. And that, Tolstoy realized, might be the key. This sparked a profound shift in him. For the first time, he opened himself to the possibility that maybe the meaning of life couldn't be uncovered through intellect alone. Maybe his mistake was assuming the human mind could solve something as mysterious and infinite as existence itself. This was the beginning of a new chapter in his journey. So, he began a deeper investigation, not through science this time, but through spiritual traditions. He read the teachings of Jesus in the Gospels. He studied Hindu scriptures, Buddhist thought, Eastern philosophies, looking not for dogma, but for a universal truth that ran through them all. To his surprise, he found striking similarities. Every tradition, in its own way, pointed toward the same idea: that life's true meaning isn't found in status or knowledge, but in humility, connection, and surrender to something greater than oneself. Still, doubt clung to him. He didn't want to believe just because it felt good. He wanted proof, something he could live by, not just hold on to when things got hard. And so he found himself caught, pulled between two worlds. On one side, the cold clarity of reason telling him life had no ultimate meaning. On the other, a deeper intuition whispering that there had to be more. This internal tension only grew stronger. Faith promised peace, but it demanded a leap. Reason offered certainty, but left him empty. Tolstoy was standing at a crossroads, between despair and hope, between meaninglessness and belief. And he knew, if he didn't choose one, he'd be lost in the space between them forever. This inner conflict pushed Tolstoy to a breaking point. He was staring down two paths, one where life had no meaning and every day was weighed down by despair, and another that pointed toward something beyond reason. Belief, purpose, maybe even hope. And so he made a bold, life-altering choice. He would let go of the worldview that had failed him. He would no longer just think about life's meaning. He would live his way into the answer. This marked a complete transformation. He didn't just question his beliefs. He questioned his habits, his routines, his ambitions, even the foundation of his privileged life. Everything was now on the table. He was no longer content to stand at the edge of the unknown. He stepped into it. But the journey ahead was far from simple. When Tolstoy realized he was living in a spiritual vacuum, he didn't shut down, he dug in. He refused to accept life at face value. If meaning existed, he was determined to find it. Not in vague optimism, but through real exploration. He focused his search on three major paths: science, philosophy, and religion. At first, he immersed himself in philosophy. From the dialogues of Socrates and Plato to the writings of Kant, Schopenhauer, and Nietzsche, Tolstoy studied every school of thought that promised insight into the human condition. And what he found was a chaotic chorus of conflicting voices. Some claimed life had a grand design. Others insisted it was all absurdity and illusion. The deeper he went, the more disoriented he became. How could so many brilliant minds look at the same mystery and come to such radically different conclusions? To Tolstoy, it became clear: philosophy had beauty but not clarity. It had depth but not direction. It stimulated the mind, but it didn't heal the soul. So he moved on. Next, he turned to science. He believed that if the universe had order, then reason and discovery could explain our place within it. So he poured himself into the study of biology, physics, astronomy, anything that might shed light on life's larger purpose. But what he found only deepened the void. Science could map the stars. It could explain the mechanics of evolution. It could describe the processes that allowed a tree to grow, but not why the tree should exist at all. It told him how life worked, but not what it was for. The more he learned, the smaller and more insignificant humanity seemed. The universe, vast and indifferent, offered no answers to the aching questions in his heart. That's when he turned toward something he had long dismissed: faith. Raised in the traditions of the Russian Orthodox Church, Tolstoy had never taken religion seriously. But now, in the thick of his crisis, he approached it with new eyes. He began reading the Gospels, not as a churchgoer, but as a seeker. What struck him wasn't ritual or doctrine. It was the message of love, compassion, humility, and detachment from wealth and ego. And for the first time, he sensed that maybe the path to peace didn't lie in intellect at all. Maybe the answer was in how we live, not in what we know. But he didn't stop with Christianity. Tolstoy studied Hindu texts, Buddhist teachings, Islamic philosophy, and Taoist wisdom. Across cultures and continents, he noticed a shared thread: that human beings must look beyond themselves, that to find peace, we must transcend our ego and live in harmony with something larger, something eternal. And if this is already opening your eyes, drop a right on in the comments and smash that like button, because what you're about to hear next just might change the way you see everything. Among all the teachings he explored, it was the wisdom of Buddhism and Indian philosophy that struck Tolstoy most profoundly. The idea that suffering comes not from life itself, but from our attachment to desires, that peace could be found in letting go, made something click inside him. Maybe, just maybe, he'd been chasing fulfillment in all the wrong places. With every new insight, his perspective shifted. He began to see that his existential despair hadn't come from a lack of meaning in the world. It came from how he was searching for it. He had placed all his faith in logic, in personal achievements, in the pursuit of recognition. But what if the real answer was something quieter, something spiritual, even simple? Still, doubts lingered. Could this way of living, rooted in humility, detachment, and faith, truly work in the real world? He looked at people of faith and wondered, are they genuinely at peace? Or are they just fooling themselves? He didn't want comfort built on illusion. He wanted truth that could be lived, not just believed. So he made a bold move. Instead of theorizing, he tested it. He began applying spiritual principles to his daily life. He gave up many of the privileges that came with his aristocratic status. He simplified his lifestyle. He focused on giving, on helping, on serving. And the result? Almost immediately, he felt something shift inside. For the first time in years, his soul felt calm. He realized that peace didn't come from fame or brilliance or material success. It came from living with purpose, from connecting deeply with others, and from aligning his life with values that transcended ego. But this change didn't come without cost. His friends, his social circle, even his family were baffled. Why would Russia's greatest literary mind abandon luxury for a life that resembled a peasant's? Some said he was losing his mind. Others saw it as a betrayal of his class. Tolstoy didn't care. He felt grounded in a way he never had before. The road ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time he had a compass, a direction worth walking toward. And now, the questions he wrestled with weren't just philosophical. They were practical. How do you build a life that reflects this truth? How do you embody meaning, not just chase it? What Tolstoy discovered about life's purpose. After years of relentless searching. Through science, through philosophy, through the world's religions, Tolstoy's most powerful revelation didn't come from a book. It came from watching the lives of ordinary people. He observed peasants who lived in poverty, who worked endlessly, who had very little by worldly standards. And yet, there was something about them, a quiet contentment, a resilience, a peace he had never known, even at the height of his success. These people weren't chasing status or intellectual clarity. They lived simply, anchored by faith, hard work, and community. And they found meaning not by conquering life, but by serving within it. The contrast hit Tolstoy hard. The elite, those with access to power, education, and wealth, were often restless, tormented by the same existential confusion that plagued him. But the peasants, they accepted life as it was. They found purpose in giving, in belonging, in living for others. That's when it finally clicked. The meaning of life isn't found in ideas. It's found in action. It's not about fame, not about brilliance, not even about certainty. It's about love, about humility, about giving yourself to something bigger than your own ego. This realization rewired everything for Tolstoy. He let go of the belief that personal achievement would bring happiness. He embraced a new way of living, one rooted in compassion, simplicity, and spiritual service. He began to shape a philosophy grounded in selflessness, in the belief that love is the only real force capable of giving life meaning. And any life lived only for the self, destined to feel empty no matter how successful it looks from the outside. In the end, Tolstoy's answer to life's biggest question was beautifully simple. To live is to love, and to love is to serve. That, he believed, was the only way to overcome despair, and the only path to lasting peace. But for Tolstoy, this wasn't just a revelation to admire from a distance. It was a call to action, a truth so powerful that it had to be lived out, not just believed. He began reshaping his entire existence around this new understanding. He let go of the wealth, prestige, and comforts of aristocratic life. He took up simple clothes, embraced manual labor, and sought a life grounded in humility and service. But this transformation wasn't just about lifestyle. It was also spiritual. Tolstoy's faith was no longer passive. He came to believe that real belief must be practiced, not merely spoken. For him, faith meant love in action. It meant nonviolence, simplicity, compassion, not just belief in God, but living like God mattered. This outlook drew him toward figures like Jesus and the Buddha, who lived in service to others. He later admired Gandhi as well, who would go on to credit Tolstoy's writings as a key influence in shaping his own path of peaceful resistance. Tolstoy saw in all of them the same core: a quiet, courageous dedication to lifting others up and confronting injustice with grace, not violence. And this growing clarity began to create friction. He started openly criticizing organized religion, especially the Russian Orthodox Church. He believed it had strayed too far from the teachings of Christ, replacing love with authority, humility with hierarchy. This didn't go unnoticed. Eventually, the church excommunicated him. He was shunned, denounced, even monitored by authorities. But Tolstoy didn't flinch. He knew the truth he had found reached beyond social systems, beyond institutions. He was ready to follow it, no matter the cost. This spiritual and moral awakening didn't just reshape his personal life, it transformed his art. His writing took a new direction. Gone were the grand stories of war and aristocracy. In their place came intimate tales of human suffering, redemption, and the quiet beauty of a life lived with purpose. One of the first signs of this shift was the death of Ivan Ilyich, a haunting story about a man who, facing death, realizes he spent his life chasing shallow status while missing what truly matters. Then came Resurrection, a novel that boldly exposed the corruption of Russian society and called for a return to compassion and moral clarity. It was so provocative, so direct, that it became one of the reasons the church turned against him. But fiction wasn't enough. Tolstoy poured himself into essays and reflections as well. In writings like A Confession and The Kingdom of God is Within You, he laid out his vision of a pure Christianity, one free from politics, focused entirely on love, peace, and personal transformation. His ideas traveled far beyond Russia. In India, A young Mahatma Gandhi read Tolstoy's words and was deeply moved. He even wrote to Tolstoy personally, telling him that his philosophy of nonviolent resistance was helping guide a movement for independence. Tolstoy's message was simple but radical. Real faith is not about doctrine. It's about how you live. It's about choosing love in the face of hate, simplicity in a world chasing status, and service over self. Tolstoy didn't just oppose violence, he rejected it to his core. He came to believe that true change could never come through force, only through peace, compassion, and moral conviction. He stood firmly for nonviolent resistance, long before it became a movement. But this commitment to peace made him dangerous in the eyes of the Russian state. The government saw his ideas as subversive. His writings were censored, his actions monitored. The Tsar's secret police kept close watch on the man whose only weapon was a pen and a conscience. Still, Tolstoy refused to back down. He spoke boldly against inequality, condemned the abuse of power, and stood with the poor and voiceless. But the older he grew, the heavier the weight of conflict became, especially within his own home. His marriage had long been strained. His ideals clashed sharply with the life his family still clung to. And eventually, Tolstoy reached a breaking point. At the age of 82, with failing health and a restless spirit, he left home quietly without warning. No destination, no plan, just a final act of defiance, or perhaps liberation. He made it only as far as a small railway station called Astapovo. There, in a modest room, surrounded by a handful of friends and followers, Leo Tolstoy took his final breath. He died as he had come to live, far from palaces, but rich in truth.
No luxury, no crowds.
But at peace. His legacy, however, would stretch far beyond that small room. Tolstoy's life became a testament, not just to literature or philosophy, but to transformation. He proved that the search for meaning isn't reserved for saints or scholars. Anyone, from any background, can question everything, change everything, and find a deeper way to live. His final years were marked by tension, but also by a fierce clarity. He didn't just talk about truth, he chased it, lived it, and ultimately died by it. And that's why his story still matters. So what can we take from Tolstoy today? In a world overflowing with information, wealth, and distractions, his life throws down a challenge. Don't mistake success for meaning. He had it all: fame, fortune, respect, and still felt completely lost. He teaches us that comfort isn't the same as purpose. Another lesson: don't expect reason alone to solve life's biggest questions. Tolstoy tried to think his way to peace, but he found that logic and science, while brilliant, can't answer the ache in the human soul. And that truth still resonates. He also showed us that meaning isn't something we find. It's something we live. Not a sentence in a book. Not a philosophy to memorize. It's what we choose to value and how we treat others every single day. Love, service, humility. These were the anchors that saved him from despair. And they can be ours too. Tolstoy invites us to reimagine what a full life looks like, not as a collection of trophies, but as a series of choices guided by compassion. He reminds us that even in a world that feels chaotic and shallow, we can choose depth. We can choose simplicity. We can choose to love and to live for more than ourselves. There's one more lesson Tolstoy offers us, perhaps the most important of all. The meaning of life isn't something we stumble upon. It's something we live. Tolstoy came to understand that instead of waiting for some grand revelation, we have the power and the responsibility to create meaning through our daily choices. Every act of kindness, every decision to love, every moment of simplicity. These are the bricks that build a meaningful life. He showed us that living only for ourselves is a hollow path. But when we give to others, when we connect, when we serve something greater than our ego, that's when life begins to feel real. If you made it this far, it means you're not just watching, you're searching, and that already sets you apart. Now, I want you to do just 2 simple things as an affirmation that your journey toward deeper meaning has truly begun. First, drop this in the comments. Today I choose to live with purpose. Let that be your reminder and your commitment to a life that goes beyond survival, status, or success. Second, make sure you hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and share this video with someone who's also asking the big questions. Someone who, just like you, is ready to explore what life is really about. Because the search for meaning isn't a solo mission. It's something we grow through together.